Chapter 1. The Birth of a Behemoth. In the midst of World War II, as the tide began turning against Germany, Adolf Hitler demanded a new super-tank that could restore the battlefield dominance of his armored forces. The result was a fearsome giant, the Panzerkampfwagen Tiger Ausf B, better known as the King Tiger, or Tiger II. Unveiled in 1944, this tank was a 75-ton behemoth of steel and fury. It carried the 8.8-centimeter KWK-43 cannon, a long-barreled, high-velocity gun capable of punching through the thickest armor the Allies possessed. Its glacis plate, the front hull armor, was an intimidating 150 millimeters thick and sloped, making the tank nearly impervious to frontal attacks by most Allied weapons of the time. To Allied soldiers who first glimpsed it, the King Tiger looked like an indestructible fortress on tracks. German engineers had poured their expertise into the King Tiger's design. It was the successor to the already formidable Tiger I, but bigger, stronger, and deadlier. They reinforced the armor all around. The turret face was about 180 millimeters of solid steel, and even the side armor was substantial. Its gun could destroy an enemy tank at over 2 kilometers away with uncanny accuracy, well before the enemy's own guns could get within effective range. On paper, this machine embodied the Nazi ideal of battlefield supremacy: unstoppable, untouchable, and utterly lethal. Propaganda within the Third Reich touted it as the strongest tank ever built, a Wunderwaffe, wonder weapon, that would crush Allied armor and rekindle German hopes. Yet hidden beneath the King Tiger's thick hide and brutal firepower were trade-offs that the designers either dismissed or could not fully solve. The tank was enormous and heavy, and required a powerful engine to move it. Germany's best option was the Maybach HL-230, a V12 engine providing around 700 horsepower. The same engine used in the smaller Panther tank. In the King Tiger, that engine struggled with the weight, giving the big Tiger a modest top speed of about 35 kilometers per hour, 22 miles per hour, on road. To carry its bulk, the tank had interleaved road wheels and a wide track system, giving it a stable ride and reducing ground pressure. However, this complex running gear was difficult to maintain and proved vulnerable to mud and snow. The King Tiger demanded careful manufacture and constant upkeep. Still, in the mind of Hitler and his generals, these issues could be overlooked. What mattered was that this tank could dominate any duel. They believed it would be all but invincible on the battlefield. By early 1944, the first King Tigers rolled off assembly lines at Henschel & Son in Kassel. Each one was a massive investment, costing twice as much as a Tiger I and 5 times more than a medium Panzer IV tank. Precious resources and labor were siphoned to produce it, even as Allied bombers hammered German industry. Only 487 King Tigers were ever built, far fewer than planned. But Nazi leadership was confident. They imagined companies of King Tigers smashing through enemy lines, impervious to enemy fire, scattering Allied tanks like toy soldiers. They thought they had forged the strongest tank the world had ever seen. Chapter 2. First encounters in combat. The King Tiger's combat debut came in the summer of 1944. In Normandy, France, just weeks after the D-Day landings, Allied troops first learned of this new monster. On July 18, 1944, during the British offensive, Operation Goodwood, a handful of King Tigers from the German 503rd Heavy Panzer Battalion lurched into action. British tank crews were stunned by the sight. Colossal silhouettes with long 88mm guns, firing from beyond normal combat range. In those first clashes, the King Tigers proved as advertised. A British Churchill and Sherman Firefly were knocked out before they even got close. Shells fired back simply bounced off the Tiger's thick hide. A Canadian tanker later remarked that seeing a King Tiger for the first time made his blood run cold. It looked like a giant from another world, shrugging off hits that would destroy any other tank. Yet even in that first battle, cracks in the King Tiger's legend began to show. Allied fighter bombers prowled the skies overhead, and the lumbering Tigers had to move cautiously, often by night, to avoid being spotted and bombed. The terrain itself became an enemy. During the chaos of Goodwood, one King Tiger fell into a large bomb crater left by Allied bombing. The immense weight of the tank sunk it deep into the hole. Despite frantic efforts, the crew couldn't extricate their vehicle from the pit. Ultimately, they had to scuttle it with explosives to prevent its capture. This was an early hint that the King Tiger's worst enemy might not be an Allied gun at all, but the tank's own clumsiness and weight. After Normandy, more King Tigers entered service. On the Eastern Front, the Soviet Red Army encountered them in August 1944 during the Lvov-Sandomierz offensive in Poland. A platoon of King Tigers from the 501st Heavy Panzer Battalion spearheaded a counterattack to blunt a Soviet bridgehead over the Vistula River. Thundering forward across the plains, these German heavy tanks struck fear into the hearts of opposing Soviet troops. For a moment, it seemed as though nothing could stop them. But in the dense fields and villages near Oglendov, a Soviet tank commander, Lieutenant Alexander Oskin, laid an ambush with his T-34-85 medium tanks. Concealed in the foliage, Oskin allowed 3 King Tigers to rumble perilously close. 200 meters, practically point blank for his 85mm gun. Then all hell broke loose. Oskin's tank fired first, and although his rounds couldn't penetrate the Tiger's front armor, he smartly targeted the thinner sides. One Tiger II was hit by several shots. One round jammed the turret ring. Another detonated a stored shell inside. In a flash of flame, the mighty Tiger's turret was blown clean off, the ammunition explosion obliterating the crew. The other German crews, shocked by the sudden assault, attempted to traverse their turrets toward the threat, but Oskin's men had the initiative. They swiftly switched targets and pummeled the second Tiger II. Multiple hits disabled it, likely wrecking its track and suspension. With 2 King Tigers now burning or immobilized, the third German tank tried to back off and retreat. It fired wildly, desperately seeking the unseen assailants. Oskin's T-34s pursued, circling and staying out of the Tiger's frontal cone of fire. Shots rang out and pierced the rear of the final King Tiger, striking its engine and fuel. Black smoke poured out as the beast ground to a halt. The crew clambered out, terrified, only to be met by Soviet submachine gun fire from supporting infantry. In minutes, all 3 of Hitler's newest super tanks had been knocked out by ostensibly inferior Soviet machines. This stunning ambush was a propaganda victory for the Soviets, proof that King Tigers were not invincible. It also yielded valuable intelligence. One of the disabled Tiger IIs was relatively intact and promptly captured by Soviet forces. Engineers and scientists in Moscow were eager to study this prize. The huge tank was loaded onto rail cars and shipped to the Kubinka testing ground near Moscow for thorough examination. At Kubinka, Soviet testers put the King Tiger through trials, pushing its engine, mobility, and armor to the limits. What they found confirmed many suspicions. The Tiger II's power plant struggled with its weight. In cross-country driving, the engine overheated frequently, especially in the hot summer climate. Running the tank at high throttle caused the engine temperature to skyrocket and often blew out gaskets and seals. During test drives, the Tiger II suffered repeated breakdowns. One report noted the tank couldn't go more than 10 miles at a time without something failing in the automotive systems. The massive Maybach engine and the transmission simply were under too much strain. Soviet mechanics even had to replace an entire side of the suspension on the captured tank after it failed disastrously during a short trial. To them it was clear. The King Tiger was over-engineered and under-reliable. Soviet firing tests also scrutinized the armor. They already respected the thickness of the Tiger's hide, but they wanted to know its true resilience. At Kubinka, they fired high-caliber rounds at the tank's front and sides. As expected, the thick frontal armor could not be penetrated by most Soviet guns, except perhaps at very close range. But to their surprise, the armor did not always behave as expected. When struck by large shells that failed to penetrate, the armor plates would sometimes crack or spall internally, meaning fragments from the inner face of the armor would break off. Those fragments would ricochet inside the tank like shrapnel. In some tests, Soviet shells that did not punch through still caused fist-sized chunks of steel to fly off inside the turret. Such fragments would be devastating to a crew. A tank might survive the hit, but its men could be killed, or its internal equipment smashed. Notably, one Soviet shell hit the King Tiger's thick turret front at relatively close range. It didn't go through, but a network of fine cracks appeared in the armor, and bolts popped from the impact. This was puzzling. The legendary Tiger armor was supposed to be the best in the world. Why was it cracking? Metallurgists examined samples of the Tiger II's steel and found the answer. Late in the war, Germany's supply of certain alloys was critically low. Molybdenum, a key element that made armor steel tougher and less brittle, had become scarce due to trade embargoes and mining losses. The steel used in King Tigers had substituted molybdenum with lower-quality vanadium steel alloys. The result was harder steel that, ironically, was more brittle. In essence, the King Tiger's armor, while thick, had a latent flaw. It was prone to shattering under stress. The Soviet examiners realized that a hit didn't need to penetrate to do damage. A strong impact could cause the armor to flake or crack, sending lethal steel splinters into the tank's interior. This was a serious design weakness in what was supposed to be an impregnable tank. The Kubinka tests left Soviet commanders with mixed feelings. The King Tiger's gun was indeed monstrous. In one demonstration, they even test-fired the captured 88mm gun against the front of another knocked-out King Tiger at point-blank range, and it blew a hole clean through the thick turret armor. Clearly, if a King Tiger faced another of its kind, the duel would be like two heavyweight boxers capable of knocking each other out with one punch. Its armor, though effectively immune to most Allied tank guns at long range, had been compromised by material shortages, and its mobility and reliability were, in the Soviets' judgment, well below what a battlefield tank needed. It was a giant with feet of clay. Chapter 3. The Ardennes, a tiger in winter. Even as these revelations were coming to light in the east, the King Tiger was making headlines in the west once again. In December 1944, Hitler launched a last-ditch offensive through the snowy forests of the Ardennes, the Battle of the Bulge. Among the German forces were several heavy tank units equipped with King Tigers, including the notorious SS Kampfgruppe Piper and Army heavy tank battalions. Hitler was throwing his strongest tanks into this surprise winter attack, hoping they would smash through the American lines and turn the war's tide. In the frozen, dense woods and narrow roads of the Ardennes, however, the King Tigers were as much a curse as a blessing for the German side. The offensive quickly bogged down in bottlenecks. Monstrous and ponderous, the King Tigers struggled on ice-covered roads that wound through small villages and over fragile bridges. More than once, German engineers had to frantically shore up a bridge or find an alternate route because a King Tiger simply could not cross. Its 70-ton weight would send wooden structures crashing down into the river below. On tight turns, the Tiger's long hull and wide tracks made it difficult to maneuver. These beasts often ended up blocking traffic for all the vehicles behind them. One German officer quipped that in those conditions, the King Tiger was less a predator and more a roadblock on treads. American troops soon learned to avoid head-on fights with King Tigers in the Bulge. In open fields, a single Tiger II could dominate, picking off American M4 Sherman tanks at ranges where the Sherman's guns were ineffective. But the Ardennes in winter offered other ways to fight. U.S. infantry teams armed with bazookas and landmines stalked the heavy tanks in the forests. In one incident, an American bazooka team managed to hit a King Tiger in the tracks, blowing its treads off. The crippled Tiger became a sitting duck, and the crew eventually had to abandon it and scuttle the tank. In another case, a King Tiger, commanded by SS Obersturmführer Jürgen Wessel, rolled into the Belgian town of Stavelot. As it rumbled down a street, American paratroopers fired a bazooka from an upstairs window of a wrecked house. The shaped charge rockets slammed into the Tiger's side armor. It didn't penetrate the thick steel, but it startled the crew. Wessel's driver hastily threw the tank into reverse, trying to back away from further fire. In doing so, he accidentally rammed the tank into a pile of rubble from a collapsed building. The enormous weight of the King Tiger caused it to sink and get wedged on the debris. Stuck fast and under harassing fire, Wessel's crew decided to bail out and escape on foot. The mighty Tiger was left embedded in a heap of bricks, undone by a single bazooka hit and an unyielding pile of rubble. Such moments highlighted that these supertanks, for all their power, had limited agility in tight quarters. Perhaps the most fateful encounter for the King Tiger in the Ardennes came on Christmas Eve 1944. Near the small Belgian village of Kubinka, as snow drifted silently through the pines, an American tank commander named Sergeant Glenn D. George of the 740th Tank Battalion was leading a lone M4 Sherman on a nighttime patrol. The darkness and the dense forest made for an eerie, tense journey. Suddenly, George's driver halted. Up ahead, barely discernible in the gloom, loomed a massive shape on the trail. At first they thought it might be a house or a haystack, but then the moonlight revealed the dull glint of steel and the unmistakable silhouette of a turret. A German King Tiger sat directly in their path. Its engine was off, and it was just sitting there, blocking the narrow fire-break road. Sergeant George and his crew froze. Normally, encountering a King Tiger face-to-face meant certain death for a lone Sherman. The German tank's 88mm gun could obliterate a Sherman with one shot from nearly any angle, and the Sherman's 75mm gun could not hope to penetrate the Tiger's front armor. George's heart pounded. Why hadn't the Tiger fired yet? Did its crew not see them? The American tank's blood ran cold at the realization. The German crew might be asleep or unaware, perhaps confident that no enemy would be crazy enough to be roaming here at night. This was a fleeting, golden opportunity, but also a deadly risk. Thinking fast, George ordered his gunner to load a special round, a star shell, essentially a flare, and fire it high above the German tank. With a thump, the star shell sailed into the sky and burst overhead, flooding the snowy woods in ghostly white light. The moment the light ignited, the German tank crew realized they had been caught unawares. Panicked shouts came from the Tiger. George watched as its hatches flew open, and dark shapes, the German crew, scrambled out, leaping into the snow. He immediately yelled, "Open fire!" to his bow machine gunner. Tracers streaked through the night. The German tank commander and 2 crewmen were cut down before they could reach cover. 2 others managed to disappear into the darkness of the trees. Now the colossal Tiger was sitting there, engine off, hatches open, but otherwise intact. Sergeant George couldn't believe his luck. They had captured a King Tiger tank without firing a single anti-tank shot. It was like capturing a battleship intact. After securing the area, George clambered up onto the Tiger's hull, peering inside cautiously. The interior smelled of sweat, oil, and metal, but it was undamaged. The Germans had abandoned the vehicle in perfect working order. On its turret, painted in bold numbers, was 332. This was the 332nd Tiger of its kind, and now it was in American hands. Exhilarated, George got on his radio and reported to his battalion commander, Colonel Rubel, that he had seized a working King Tiger. At first, the colonel didn't believe him. An intact capture of such a tank was unheard of. George famously joked over the radio, "Yes, sir, and I'm going to drive." Within days, as the Battle of the Bulge turned against the Germans, American forces retrieved Tiger 332. It wasn't easy. Recovery crews from the 463rd Ordnance Evacuation Company arrived with a heavy truck and trailer, but quickly found that normal tank transport equipment was barely up to the task. The Tiger was so wide and heavy that it didn't fully fit on the trailer. Its steel tracks hung over the sides, and as they tried to winch it on, the immense weight flattened the trailer's tires. To make matters worse, the tank had literally frozen to the ground. Its treads were cemented into the icy mud. The recovery crew had to pour gasoline around the tracks and set it alight to melt the ice, locking it in place. Once freed, the King Tiger was very gingerly dragged aboard the trailer. The tractor truck strained and groaned under the load as it hauled the 70-ton monster down narrow, snowy roads toward the railhead in Spa, Belgium. Photos taken at Spa show American GIs gawking at Tiger 332, dwarfed by its bulk. They had hastily painted white Allied stars and USA 1 on the tank side, as well as the letters 463 Ord Evac on the turret. A bit of graffiti by the recovery unit to stake their bragging rights for capturing the beast. By January 1945, Tiger 332 was loaded onto a train flat car and transported to the port of Antwerp. There it was craned into the hold of a ship bound across the Atlantic. The men who had captured and retrieved it likely never imagined they'd send a piece of German heavy metal on a one-way trip to America. But that's exactly what happened. The King Tiger was about to meet its next foe, the inquisitive minds of American engineers. Chapter 4. Discovering the Fatal Flaw. In early 1945, as war still raged in Europe, Tiger 332 arrived at the Aberdeen Proving Ground in Maryland, the U.S. Army's premier testing facility for foreign and experimental weapons. Aberdeen had long been the place where captured enemy equipment was sent for evaluation. British and American experts had already tested German Panther tanks and even a captured Tiger I from Italy. Now they had the ultimate prize, an intact Tiger II. American ordnance engineers and technicians approached the King Tiger with a mix of awe and curiosity. Here it stood on American soil, the largest, most feared tank the Germans had produced. Its mottled ambush camouflage paint still clung to its armor plates, and the evidence of war, scuffs, bullet gouges, and a bit of shrapnel scarring, gave silent testimony to its battlefield life. The first step was simply to examine every inch, cataloguing its features. The thick armor, the layout of its interior, the massive gun and turret mechanism, the engine and drivetrain. American engineers climbed inside, noting the close quarters for the crew, the arrangement of shell racks, and the sophisticated, if cramped, sighting equipment. They remarked on the excellent workmanship of certain parts. For example, the gun's optics were superb, giving a clear and magnified view with fine reticles for long-range shooting. The thick armor welding appeared solid at first glance. Truly, on the surface, this tank still impressed mightily. Next came active tests. Aberdeen personnel prepared Tiger 332 for running trials. Fresh fuel, oil, and coolant were added. They inspected the Maybach engine and the transmission. These had survived the Battle of the Bulge and the transatlantic journey without major damage. Army test driver Joe Chambers, a veteran at Aberdeen who had driven everything from Shermans to captured Japanese tanks, was given the task of driving the King Tiger. Firing it up, he noted the engine's deep roar and the tank's slow throttle response. Over several days, Chambers and the team put Tiger 332 through a series of driving exercises. They ran it on Aberdeen's paved test track and on rough terrain courses meant to simulate cross-country movement. They tested its acceleration, turning, and braking. As expected, the King Tiger was sluggish off the mark. Physics could not be denied. Its enormous mass meant it accelerated slowly, but once up to speed, it could plod along at a respectable pace for a heavy tank. The wide tracks gave decent float on soft ground, and it could navigate over trenches and obstacles without too much trouble. Observers noted that the Tiger II could turn in place, a neutral steer, thanks to its sophisticated transmission, an advantage in pivoting its bulk. So far so good, it seemed. However, as the tests extended, problems began to emerge. After only a short cumulative distance of driving, around 80 miles in total according to one report, Tiger 332 suffered a major mechanical failure. While attempting to shift gears and climb a slope, the tank lurched and ground to a stop. The transmission had jammed, and several gear teeth sheared off, sending metal fragments into the gear train. Essentially, the Tiger's mighty transmission had given out under the strain of normal operation. The Aberdeen team was shocked. This was a vehicle designed to spearhead offensives, yet its critical drivetrain component had worn out or broken after what was, in peacetime terms, just a couple days of moderate use. Digging into the problem, the American engineers discovered that the transmission and final drive, the components that deliver engine power to the tracks, were not robust enough for the tank's great weight. The transmission was a complex, semi-automatic design that in theory was advanced for its time, but it had been originally developed for a tank much lighter. In the King Tiger, those same parts were overstressed. German maintenance manuals, captured and translated, indicated frequent breakdowns and short service life for these parts, something the Aberdeen tests had dramatically confirmed. American tank experts, who prided themselves on the reliability of their own simpler designs, couldn't help but shake their heads. Such a powerful weapon, laid low by something as mundane as a failing gearbox. This was a fatal design flaw in the King Tiger. It had brute strength, but fragile guts. Engineers also evaluated the engine cooling system. They found it insufficient, just as the Soviets did. After running the engine at high output for a while, the temperature climbed into the danger zone. The Tiger's huge engine compartments had fans and radiators, but they struggled to keep the mighty Maybach cool, especially if the tank wasn't moving fast, and a King Tiger rarely moved fast. In tests simulating a summer day, the coolant began to boil over, and the engine had to be shut down to avoid self-destruction. It became clear that in prolonged operations, especially in hot weather, the King Tiger would be prone to overheating and damaging its engine. While mechanics toiled on fixing Tiger 332's transmission for further trials, ballistic experts at Aberdeen turned their attention to the Tiger's armor. The U.S. Army wanted to know how to kill this beast. Using armor samples cut from damaged sections of the tank, and some spare armor plates that were shipped along from Germany, American metallurgists fired various American anti-tank rounds at the Tiger's steel to see how it held up. What they saw corroborated what the Soviets had found. The armor was extremely hard, but somewhat brittle. Under impact from a high-velocity shell, even one that didn't penetrate, the armor tended to crack and spall internally. An American 90mm armor-piercing shell, the type fired by the new M26 Pershing heavy tank, was tested against a piece of Tiger II armor at moderate range. It failed to pierce outright, but the plate showed large internal fractures, and pieces broke off the back. In effect, a non-penetrating hit could still produce deadly spray inside the tank, a sobering fact for any crew relying on their armor. Chemical analysis confirmed the low molybdenum content in the German armor. The Allied scientists knew well by this point that the German late-war steel had been compromised by resource shortages. The King Tiger's protection was not uniformly poor. It would still bounce most Allied shots, but it wasn't the absolute assurance of safety the Germans hoped for. A hit by a powerful round could cause unseen damage that might disable the tank or injure its crew, even if the shell itself didn't punch through. Thus, even in the realm of protection, the strongest tank had an Achilles heel. As weeks of evaluation went on, Aberdeen's specialists compiled their findings. They admired the King Tiger's gun, noting its ability to penetrate over 6 inches of armor at 1,000 yards, far beyond the capabilities of standard US 75mm guns. They found its optics and fire control to be excellent, allowing a well-trained German gunner to hit targets at ranges American crews would rarely even attempt. They also commented on the clever torque steering system that allowed the heavy tank to turn in place, and the torsion bar suspension that gave it a surprisingly smooth ride for its size. In many ways, the King Tiger was an engineering marvel, a culmination of decades of tank development. However, its downsides were glaring. The tank was over-engineered and mechanically temperamental. It demanded constant maintenance and was prone to catastrophic breakdowns if pushed too hard. Its immense weight was a tactical hindrance in many environments, limiting the roads and bridges it could use and making field recovery a nightmare. American crews who trained on Tiger 332 for familiarization came away with respect, but relief. They were grateful they never had to face swarms of these monsters, but they could also see that if used improperly, the Tiger II was as dangerous to its own side as to the enemy. One American report dryly noted that many King Tigers were lost not to Allied fire, but to mechanical failure or fuel starvation. In war, a tank that cannot move or fight is as good as dead, no matter how thick its armor or how powerful its gun. By the war's end, the consensus among Allied evaluators was clear. The King Tiger, while technologically impressive and tactically formidable, was not a war winner. It was a heavyweight boxer that could deliver a knockout punch, but could also collapse from exhaustion after a few rounds. The Nazis had believed they were creating the strongest tank on Earth, and in a narrow sense, they had. No Allied tank could go toe-to-toe with a King Tiger and expect to survive a frontal duel. But the Americans and Soviets discovered the fatal flaw in that strength. It came at the cost of reliability and practicality. The King Tiger was powerful but brittle, both in its steel and in its mechanical heart. Chapter 5. Legacy of the King Tiger. When Germany finally surrendered in May 1945, the King Tiger had been in service for barely 10 months. In that short time, it had garnered a fearsome reputation, but also a record of disappointment. Many King Tigers were abandoned by their crews, out of fuel or broken down on the roadside. Dozens were found by advancing Allied forces, blown up or burned, victims of mechanical issues or lack of gasoline, as the Third Reich's supply lines collapsed. Those that did see significant combat often racked up impressive tallies of enemy vehicles destroyed, proving that in the right circumstances, the Tiger II was nearly untouchable. Yet, these isolated tactical successes could not change the course of the war. There were simply too few King Tigers, and too many problems plaguing them. The story of the King Tiger serves as a cautionary tale in military history. It exemplifies the tension between quality and quantity, between technology and pragmatism. Nazi Germany poured resources it could ill afford into building a handful of supertanks that, at best, achieved local superiority. Meanwhile, the Allies, particularly the Soviet Union and United States, focused on simpler, more robust designs that could be produced en masse and used reliably. A King Tiger might destroy 5 or 10 Shermans or T-34s in a battle, but there was always another platoon of Shermans or a column of T-34s coming. And if that King Tiger broke down, which it often did, it might end up destroyed by its own crew or left for the enemy without having achieved anything at all. American engineers, after studying Tiger 332 and other captured German armor, came away with valuable lessons. The US Army, impressed by the Tiger II's firepower, did experiment with heavy tank designs like the T-29 and T-26E4 Super Pershing, trying to incorporate higher velocity guns to match the German 88. But they never lost sight of the need for reliability and ease of manufacture. The war had shown that a tank that is good enough, but available in great numbers, and can be counted on to start every morning, was better than a tank that is superb in theory, but too few and too finicky. Tiger 332, the very tank that Sergeant George captured, became a trophy of knowledge. After its time at Aberdeen Proving Ground, it was shipped to various army museums. The left side of its hull was cut open like a giant dollhouse, so visitors could peer into its interior and marvel at the beast's inner workings. Today, decades later, that same tank, the only fully intact King Tiger ever captured by US forces, rests in the US Armor and Cavalry Collection, a testament to an era of giants. In hindsight, the Nazis were not entirely wrong. The King Tiger was the strongest tank in pure brute terms during World War II, but strongest did not mean best. The American and Soviet findings laid bare the fatal flaw of the King Tiger. Its strength was undermined by crippling weaknesses in design. The King Tiger remains an object of fascination for historians, tank enthusiasts, and veterans alike. A symbol of military might and technological ambition, and also a reminder that bigger is not always better. In the end, this king of tanks was brought low, not by enemy shells, but by its own overburdened engine and stressed steel. The tale of the King Tiger's rise and fall shows how even the most fearsome weapons can be undone by the simplest of truths. A machine is only as strong as its weakest part.